Today we're going to be taking a look at a Shimano Longcast Big BaitRunner teardown and rebuild. A lot of the parts internally I've already replaced, so this is basically just going to be a teardown and rebuild of the existing internal parts. We're going to start by removing the handle and then along with the spool. Following that, we're going to take the spool gear and washer off, along with the spacer and the line saver. Right, so from here we're going to take the number 1 Phillips screwdriver and remove the 4 main screws from the reel body itself. And then onto the locking nut that holds the rotor on. Just remember that this, to undo it, is the opposite way. And then we slip off the rubber cover or sleeve. Right, and then onto the rear of the reel, we're going to remove the 4 screws that hold on the tension system for the BaitRunner itself. Once removed, obviously we're going to take out one by one the tensioning system. Now this gear on mine is a little sticky because I'd used a fibre washer with oil. It creates a better seal and gives you more tension on the BaitRunner. From there we're going to remove the 4 screws on the front here of the clutch and anti-reverse assembly. Once you've undone those, the whole thing will slide right off. And from there we're going to take out the 2 screws that hold on the BaitRunner lever. There is a washer underneath that first screw, so just make sure you keep that to one side. From there the reel will be able to open using a small flat screwdriver. And there we go. The drive side can be put over to another area, leaving the bearing inside of it. And then from there we're going to remove the flange cover along with the drive gear. To pull this out the first time it might be a little difficult, so just rotate it a few times until it becomes loose. Now, just removing the bearing from the opposite side of the reel. And again, all these parts are new, so I'm just going to be replacing them once we're done with this. So from there, the drive shaft, gear and bearing is removed, put to one side. And now I'm just going to wipe down some of the excess grease. Right, after that, we're going to remove these 2 small Phillips screws. They hold a retaining plate that keeps the worm shaft in place along with a support bar. Now behind this plate there are 2 PTFE bushings that will definitely have to be replaced on any of these reels over a period of time. They do wear down, but this plate comes out then allows you to gain access to those. From there, we're going to remove the BaitRunner assembly. There is a spring located directly below this that you have to remove also, so don't lose that one. There it is. Following on from that, we're going to remove the gear from the opposite side of the tension for the BaitRunner, and there is a small C-clip retention clip that holds those gears in place. So it's just a case of 2 screwdrivers either side. That'll pop right off. There we go, there's the first ring and there's the collar. This single screw that we're going to remove allows us to remove a plate that, to remove it, will slide back and forth. If you don't slide it back before lifting it, you will bend the 4 bars that basically hold the main axle, the main rod in place. So make sure you slide that back and then lift it up and over, and then from there you'll be able to remove that. Once that's done, the main axle will slide right out. Give that a quick wipe down. Right, so I'm just going to clear this off. Inside the this part there will be a pin that, right below where I'm cleaning, and that will need to be removed shortly. So this bar comes out as a support for the worm shaft, and that is the first of the PTFE bushings that was held in by the plate. These are new, so they'd be good to go straight back in. The old ones were completely worn. And there's the second one, slightly bigger. From there, I'm going to remove the second gear, which aligns with the worm shaft. Now these are a little tricky to get out because of the pin that holds them in place. And don't lose that little washer. And once you've worked the worm gear through all the way to the end, you'll be able to slide it out. Just like that. And then we're going to remove the pin that is set into this, which is the reason why it's very difficult initially to get that off. And there it is. Right, so we're going to give the reel a little bit of a clean out. That's another PTFE bushing that will definitely need to be replaced with a new one, and another one also that holds the oscillation shaft in place. So basically just a quick cleaning. I've obviously done this beforehand, and I'm just removing the excess grease from there. And now it's time to start the rebuild. This is a little plate that I'm removing that holds the BaitRunner assembly in place. Below that there is a spring with a bar, and and they can actually stay in the reel. There's no need to remove them. And the same with the BaitRunner switch. I'm just going to put a drop or two on to these areas, just to allow freer movement, if you will, and then give that a few moves just to work the oil in, and the same with the spring. And then of course it's on to cleaning all the parts. So you might be able to salvage some of the original parts, but I do suggest replacing most of, if not all, on a rebuild like this. So it's basically the reverse of what we've just done. It can be a little bit tricky getting these in first time round, but just take your time. Right, so once they're in, I'm going to set the main, or this secondary gear in. It can go in both ways, but these gears have an alignment on them that will mesh up with the worm shaft. So you kind of have to hold the gear and spin the worm shaft until they lock together, and there's that little washer going back on. Don't forget that. It does kind of eat up a little bit of the play that's there. If you don't put it on, you'll notice it afterwards once it's all back together. So basically you hold the gear in place and rotate the worm shaft until it locks into the gear. And then from there we're going to replace the bushings back. Now they do have an alignment on them, so you will be able to rotate them, and once they've rotated to the correct place, you can just push down on them gently and they will fall into place. And onto the second one, which is slightly bigger, and the same deal for these guys as well. These do take a little while to get in, and they are a little tricky, but once you've figured it out, it doesn't take too long. Now once you do have them back in, take the plate, the retaining plate that holds them in place, and get that back in. Once that's in place, it gives you the ability to move around a little bit more without the worry of the bushings falling out. Alright, there we go, so they're back in. So what we're going to do now is a couple of drops of oil in there, and that's going to be followed by the grease. Now, don't want to put too much in, but the cavity that's there, you basically want to fill that up. So as it works its way along the shaft, it gives it an even coating. This is the easiest way I've done it. I mean, everyone does it differently, I'm sure, but this seems to work out quite well. Then we're going to take that pin that we removed, just give it another wipe down, make sure there's nothing on there, any grit or debris that might have come from somewhere else, and that just sits back in there. And gently push that down. You might have to rotate the shaft so that it seats itself back in position, but you'll know as soon as it does, it will sink, it will just drop down in there correctly, and you'll see that you'll be able to rotate the shaft and it will work its way back and forth. So from there I'm just going to clean off the excess grease. Now to the next step. From here we're going to take the front bushing. It will align, so that one's really not too hard to put back in place. There we go. Now from there is another ring. It's more of a bushing that holds the gear shaft and bearing in place. That's an easy one to put in. Again, this will need to be replaced if it's an older reel. They do wear out and wear down over time. So from there we're going to work on rebuilding the BaitRunner section, or the tension section for the BaitRunner on the back of the reel. So a little bit of grease on that, and that goes straight back in there. That's going to be followed by washer, and then the gear. Now the gear is rounded on one side, flat on the other. I prefer to turn them the opposite way around so that they lock better on the engagement with the BaitRunner. It's not the way they were on there from the factory, however I find that this works a little bit better. And then obviously we're going to replace the small C clip to help retain those on there. And there we go, and that's on. Just make sure it's turning. Just add a drop of precision oil between the wall of the reel and the washer, and then just use the brush to work that in there. And there we go. Just check that it's able to rotate freely and smoothly. So now we can take the main shaft, place that back through, and line it up with the free spool mechanism at the back of the reel. You're going to align the two notches up, and basically the complete opposite of what we had just done. Put the plate back on, lift it over, and then push it till it closes. And then obviously the single screw goes in to keep that in place. Now here we can take off the bearing. Didn't need to, but just so you can see how it's done. And then starting by sliding the gear back in, making sure it meshes correctly with the internal gear there. Following that, the bearing goes on. And then I just give it a few rotations to make sure that nothing is in the gears stopping them from meshing correctly, and also to make sure that it's moving freely. So from there we're going to put the BaitRunner switch back in. First obviously the spring that came out is going to go back in, and it's going to be a little tricky. So a pair of tweezers and some patience. But basically you want to get the spring attached to the BaitRunner first, and then use the tension of the spring to push the BaitRunner switch back into the port. To make sure that it's engaging correctly. Good to go. So from there, the plate that we took off that holds the spring and the BaitRunner switch in place can go back in, along with the screw. Couple of drops of oil onto the bearing, and that can be inserted back into the reel. Now these bearings can be rebuilt. Two of them from the other reel, one of the other reels I had rebuilt, and then I purchased 4 replacements for the other 2 reels. This was one of the replacements, and in it goes. From there, I'm going to basically apply a good amount of grease to the gears. Definitely helps using the brush. There are other tools that you can use, but I found that these small silicone brushes work very well. So also along the shaft, since that's where most of the drive is coming from, and then basically just work that in, move it up, and then apply a little more on the other end. There we go. So from there, we're going to grease the gear drive. The original one from this reel, the teeth were completely sheared, so a new one of those was needed for this particular reel, and it made all the difference. So plenty of grease on this as it goes back in, along with the bearing washer, as it's sitting directly on that does see a lot of pressure, so you want to make sure that that is meshed up and working correctly right there. And again, same as we took it out, upon putting it back in, you're going to need to just rotate that until it drops into the bearing, and then you'll need to just give it a little push, and then it's in. single drop of oil, precision oil on the brass washers that will be touching the drive side bearing, and then we just check just to make sure that everything's rotating smooth. From there, just a little grease on the spring. And that's for your bait runner. This is what actually makes that clicking sound as it spins. And then we apply the drive side back to the reel, following the flange. There we go. Apply the 4 screws back into the reel. And then from there to the rear bait runner assembly. So the fibre washer goes on first. Followed by the gear. That tooth gear is rounded on one side, so I tend to flip it over so that it locks in a little bit better. That's not how it came from factory, but it seems to work better that way. So that's followed by the PTFE plastic washer, and then the brace, and a couple of drops of precision oil, and then the brush just to help work that in. And then the adjustment and spring assembly can be placed back on, and the 4 screws tightened down. Okay, so from there it's the reverse of what we've already done. Putting the bait runner lever back on, and then onto the clutch anti-reverse assembly. Now when you're placing this on, you'll find that if you actually disengage the switch for the anti-reverse, it will help you, or allow you to see the assembly back on a little easier, and you'll feel it click in place. And then of course screws, and then back in with the bearing. And then just seat that down gently. Apply a couple of drops of oil into the main shaft. And then a quick test just to make sure everything's turning and running smoothly. Back on with the rubber seal, and the rotor and the nut. Remembering to tighten the nut is the complete opposite. Take the long nose pliers and give that a good tighten down. And there we go, nice and snug. Give it a quick spin, nice and smooth. Alright, from there we can start putting the washers back on. So first the support washer, a little bit of grease, followed by the line saver, making sure the arms go into the grooves, and then the bearing spacer, followed by the washer and the spool gear, and a single fibre washer. A little grease on the gear, and back on the spool goes. right tension on it, and it's good to go. Place the handle, give it a spin, check the bait runner. Good to go. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you do have any questions, please feel free to ask or message me. Cheers.